18 months ago, my daughter stood in a courthouse hallway and watched the bailiff clamp cuffs around my wrists. She did not cry. She did not look away. She just pressed her palm to the back of her lover's arm, the way a woman steadies herself against something solid, and she let them lead me past her like I was already a ghost. Tomorrow, those same doors will open for me. And the day of my release will be the day she finally understands what it feels like when the world turns on you, calmly, efficiently, and without mercy. I want you to picture it clearly, because I have replayed it in my head 1,000 times. The prison gate sliding open, the morning air cutting into lungs that have been breathing recycled misery, my boots stepping onto free ground, and my daughter waiting there with a practiced smile and a camera crew she hired to film her forgiveness. She thinks the release is the ending. It is not. It is the match. Because I am not walking out to beg for my life back. I am walking out to take hers apart piece by piece, with the same patience she used to bury me. And the worst part for her is this. She gave me 18 months to plan. The last night inside has a sound. It is not the shouting or the metal doors or the distant arguments that flare like brush fires and die just as fast. It is the quiet counting. In my cell, the vent above my bunk breathed warm, dusty air that smelled like old paint and damp concrete. The light never fully went out. It only dimmed enough to make you feel like you were resting while keeping your body braced for impact. I lay on my back and stared at the ceiling and listened to my heart, steady and stubborn. My name is Walter Rourke. I am 68 years old. I have one living child and one grandchild who still calls me Grandpa, like the word means safety. For most of my life, I believed that if you lived straight, worked hard, and kept your hands clean, the world would meet you with something resembling fairness. Prison cures you of that. Prison teaches you that truth is not a shield. Truth is a story, and the person with the better costume wins. My daughter had the costume. She had tears that arrived on cue, a trembling voice, and a lover who wore tailored suits and spoke softly about protecting the community. He was the kind of man people lean toward when he talks, the kind of man who makes you feel honored to be in the same room as him. His name is Grant Holloway. 18 months ago, he decided I was in his way. My daughter, Elise, decided he was worth sacrificing me for. And because the world likes a clean narrative, they made me the villain without even looking for another plot. On the wall beside my bunk, I had scratched a small tally mark for every week I survived. 78 marks. I traced the last one with my fingertip until my nail snagged on the rough groove. A year and a half. 1,600 small humiliations. 200 nights of waking up with my fists clenched, dreaming of my granddaughter's face and the way she pressed her cheek against my shoulder when she got sleepy. My cellmate, a thin man named Price, who talked too much when he was nervous, rolled over on his bunk and said, "You're not even smiling." "I'll smile outside," I told him. He snorted. "People say that. Then they get out and they realize the world moved on." "It hasn't moved on," I said. He went quiet, like he sensed the edge in my voice. Men inside learn to read the difference between anger and something colder. Price didn't know why I was there. Most didn't. In prison, your charge becomes your name, but I kept mine close. If you tell your story too much, it stops feeling like yours. I turned my head and looked through the bars at the corridor. 2 guards at the far end, laughter low, coffee in their hands. Routine. Predictable. My stomach tightened anyway. Because the only thing worse than being locked in a cage is knowing someone outside is wearing your life like a coat. Elise and Grant were living in my house. They were driving my truck. They were cashing checks from the business I built with my hands. They were raising my granddaughter in a home where my name was now spoken like an accusation. And tomorrow they would be at the gate, smiling for the cameras, ready to show the world how noble they were for letting the old man come home. They thought I would walk out broken and grateful. they thought wrong. The lie they used to put me away was simple. That is why it worked. When a lie is complicated, people poke at it. They ask questions. They notice seams. When a lie is simple, people hold it like a stone in their palm and convince themselves it has always been there. They said I assaulted Grant. They said I pulled a gun on him. They said I threatened Elise when she tried to stop me. They said my granddaughter, Nora, saw it all. I did not own a gun. I never had. My hands shook too much these days for that kind of confidence. But Grant produced one anyway, laid out on a courtroom evidence table like a holy object. He told them it was mine. He told them I waved it at his face in my own driveway and promised to kill him for stealing my daughter. Elise testified with tears glistening in her eyes. She told them her father had become unstable after my wife died. She told them I drank too much. She told them she had been scared of me for months. Then they played a shaky phone video of me in my driveway, voice raised, face red, shouting at someone off camera. I was shouting at Grant, yes. I was shouting because I'd caught him in my garage with a folder full of documents that had my name on them and my signature that was not mine. I was shouting because I'd realized he had been using my social security number to open lines of credit, moving money, laundering it through my own business. I was shouting because Elise stood behind him and did not look surprised. She looked resigned. And then, in the middle of my shouting, the camera jerked, and there was a flash of metal in someone's hand. A gun! My gun, they claimed. The clip ended right there, before the part where Grant stepped forward and pushed the barrel into my palm, forcing my fingers around it while Elise screamed for the neighbors. Before the part where police cars arrived in under 3 minutes like they'd been parked around the corner. Before the part where Nora ran out barefoot, crying, confused, and Elise scooped her up and hissed into her ear, loud enough for me to hear, "Tell them what you saw, baby. Tell them Grandpa scared you." I will never forget my granddaughter's face as she looked at me through Elise's arms. Nora's eyes were wide and wet. Her mouth opened as if she wanted to say something else, and then she looked at Grant. He smiled at her, not warm, not kind. A smile like a lock turning. Nora's chin trembled, and she nodded. That was the moment I understood the full depth of what they were doing. Not just framing me, training her to help. The trial lasted 4 days. My public defender was tired, polite, and already defeated. He asked the wrong questions. He objected too late. He did not dig into the paperwork that showed the gun had been purchased by someone else. Elise cried on the stand. Grant spoke softly about de-escalation. Nora was not made to testify, thank God, but her recorded statement was played. A child's voice saying, "Grandpa had the gun." That was enough. The judge looked at me like I was a disappointment, not a man. 18 months. Time served would not count toward the part of the sentence that mattered most, the part where I was erased from my granddaughter's life. I was led out in cuffs. Elise stood at the end of the hall. For a second, our eyes met. I waited for something in her face. Regret, shame, anything. She only tightened her grip on Grant's arm. And Grant gave me a small nod, as if we had completed a transaction. That nod followed me into every sleepless night that came after. Inside, time does not pass. It accumulates. The first week I thought only about Nora. I pictured her braiding my wife's old scarf around her stuffed rabbit. I pictured her waiting for me at the window like she used to when I came back from the hardware store. The second week, I started getting letters, not from Elise. From my neighbor, Mrs. Peabody, who had known me for 20 years and wrote like she was afraid someone would read over her shoulder. "Walter, I'm sorry. I don't know what to do. They changed the locks. They said you threatened them. I saw them carrying out boxes. From my old foreman, Victor, who ran the shop floor when my knees started failing. They're making changes. Grant's got his hands in the books. He fired Marcus and hired some guy from his campaign." Campaign. That was the detail that made my stomach turn. Grant was running for county commissioner. He had posters in town with his face smiling above slogans about integrity and safety. My arrest had been his perfect proof. A dangerous old man, stopped by a brave community leader. It was theater. And Elise loved theater. Even as a girl, she knew how to perform her way out of consequences. I raised her alone after her mother died. I worked too much. I tried to give her stability, and in doing so, I taught her that love can be measured in what you provide. By the time she was 32, she measured love in cash, access, and status. Grant offered all of it, so she offered him me. In prison, the first threat came 2 months in. I was in the laundry room folding uniforms when a young man with dead eyes stepped close enough that I smelled mint gum on his breath. "Old man," he murmured, "you should keep your mouth shut when you get out." I looked at him. "About what?" He smiled without humor. "About the people who got you in." A second later he bumped me, hard, and a sharpened piece of metal slid across my ribs under my shirt. Just enough to sting, just enough to promise. He walked away like nothing had happened. I stood there, hands still on a bundle of cloth, and felt something inside me settle into place. Grant wasn't content with my silence. He wanted my fear. He wanted me to come out small. That night I asked for library duty. When you are old in prison, you either become prey or you become invisible. The library made me invisible. The man who ran the library was named Calvin Stokes, a white-collar criminal with the posture of a professor. He was serving 12 years for running numbers through shell charities. He watched me read legal books for hours and finally said, "You're not reading like a man hoping to appeal. You're reading like a man building a blueprint." "I'm reading," I said. He tapped the table. "Don't insult my intelligence. What did you do?" "I didn't do anything," I said, and the words came out with a calm that surprised me. Calvin studied my face. Then he leaned closer, voice low. "Then somebody did something to you." "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Who?" I should have kept quiet. I should have guarded it. But I was starving for one thing prison can't give you: a witness to your truth. "My daughter," I said, "and her lover." Calvin didn't react the way most men do when you say daughter. Most men flinch away from that kind of betrayal, like it might be contagious. Calvin only said, "Money and power." He gave a small smile. Those are the only gods people worship honestly. Over the next months, Calvin became something like an ally, not a friend. Prison doesn't allow that word to mean much. But he knew systems. He knew paperwork. He knew where lies hide. In numbers that look boring. When I showed him my letters, when I told him about Grant's campaign and my business, Calvin's eyes sharpened. "They're using your company," he said. "They're moving money through it." "How do you know?" "Because they didn't just lock you up," he said. "They took your mouth and your credibility. That's not revenge. That's containment." Containment. The word sat heavy in my chest, because it meant Grant was still afraid of me. Even in a cell, even with my name dragged through the mud, he was still afraid I could ruin him. Calvin slid a pencil toward me. "You got anyone on the outside you trust absolutely?" "One person." I thought of my sister, dead, my old friends, scattered, my lawyer, weak. Then I thought of a man named Raymond Ivers. Ray had been my friend since high school. We served together in the same volunteer fire brigade when we were young. He later became an investigator for the State Insurance Board. Not glamorous, not political. The kind of man who sits quietly and follows trails nobody else has the patience to track. Ray had attended my trial. He had sat in the back, jaw tight, eyes hard. After the verdict, he'd tried to get to me. The bailiffs pushed him back, but I saw his mouth form the words, "I believe you." I wrote him a letter that night, not begging for help, giving him a task. If Grant was laundering money through my business, there would be a paper trail. If Elise and Grant had forged documents, There would be inconsistencies. If they had staged my arrest, there would be calls, timing, coordination. Things that don't show up in court when everyone is dazzled by tears. Things that show up when you follow the boring. Ray wrote back 2 weeks later. One line, written in his blunt, careful hand. I'm looking. That was the first day I felt hope. Not soft hope. Hard hope. The kind you can sharpen. 3 months before my release, I got another visit. Not from Elise. From Grant. He had enough power to arrange it. Of course he did. The visitation room smelled like disinfectant and old coffee. I sat behind thick glass, wearing orange, feeling older than I ever had. My hands looked too large, too veined. Grant walked in wearing a gray suit like he was attending a luncheon. His hair was perfect. His smile was gentle. He picked up the phone and said, Walter. I lifted my own receiver. Grant? I said. He tilted his head. How are you holding up? I'm alive. That's good, he said softly. I wanted to talk to you as family. The word made bile rise in my throat. I'm not your family, I said. You're Nora's grandfather, he replied as if correcting a child. And Elise and I want stability for her. Is that why you bought a man to cut me in laundry? I asked. The smile on his face did not flicker. Instead, he leaned closer, voice almost tender. You have no proof of that. I felt my pulse slow. Calvin had warned me. Men like Grant don't threaten directly. They imply. They let you fill in the blanks so they can deny the words later. Grant's eyes held mine. Tomorrow, he said, you'll be out. People will be watching. Elise wants a clean story, a redeemed father, a healed family. I don't care what Elise wants, I said. Grant's gaze sharpened just a fraction. You should. I waited. He smiled again. Nora's starting a new school soon. Private, structured, good for her. Elise has been worried about your influence on her. My influence, I repeated. Yes, he said calmly. Children absorb bitterness. We don't want her confused. My fingers tightened around the receiver. You keep my granddaughter's name out of your mouth, I said. Grant's voice stayed low, even. Then keep my name out of yours. There it was. Not a threat, a trade. Silence for access. I stared at him, and something in his expression told me he believed he was untouchable, that he had already won. Tell Elise, I said slowly, that I'll smile for the cameras. Grant relaxed, satisfied. I knew you'd be reasonable, he said. As he stood to leave, he added almost casually, Old age is lonely, Walter. Don't make it lonelier. Then he walked out, leaving me holding a dead receiver, staring at my own reflection in the glass. The moment the guard signaled the visit was over, I stood, legs stiff. Calvin was waiting for me in the corridor when I returned to the unit. He saw my face and said, They're worried. They should be, I said. I went back to my cell and sat on my bunk and stared at the tally marks. I had promised Grant a smile. I would give him one, but not the kind he expected. The morning of my release came gray and cold. The guards moved with a different rhythm. Paperwork, signatures, property bag. I dressed in the clothes Ray had brought months earlier. Jeans, boots, a flannel shirt that smelled like fabric softener in home. When they handed me my possessions, I found the envelope tucked beneath them. Plain white. No return address. My name written in block letters. Inside was a single photograph. Nora in the back seat of my truck, face turned toward the window. Her hair was longer, her cheeks thinner, and there was a bruise on her upper arm shaped like fingers. My vision tunneled, my throat tightened until it hurt to breathe. On the back of the photograph, someone had written, She is not safe, no signature, no explanation, but I knew. Grant's smile, Elise's performance, the private school, the way Nora looked at Grant before she nodded in that driveway. This wasn't just about money. It never had been. It was about control. I folded the photograph carefully and slid it into my pocket like a weapon. When the gate finally opened, the air hit me like a slap. Real cold. Real wind. The smell of wet pavement and exhaust and freedom. And there they were. Elise stood by a black SUV, hair styled, coat expensive, face arranged into sorrowful relief. Her eyes widened when she saw me, and for a heartbeat I saw something raw in her expression. Not guilt. Fear. Grant stood beside her, hand resting lightly at the small of her back, guiding her like he owned her posture. Two people with cameras hovered nearby, equipment ready, lenses pointed. Grant stepped forward first, smiling for the world. "Walter," he said warmly, loud enough for microphones. "Welcome home." Elise followed, voice trembling on cue. "Dad?" I stood still. 18 months of imagining this moment, and now that it was here, it felt oddly quiet inside me. Like the storm had already passed and left only clear, cold purpose. I looked at Elise. "You got thinner," she said, as if she was commenting on the weather. "I had time to think," I replied. Her eyes flicked toward the cameras. She stepped closer, arms opening as if to hug me for the footage. I let her. She smelled like expensive perfume in someone else's life. In my ear, she whispered, barely moving her lips, "Please don't do this today." My hands stayed at my sides. "Do what?" Her breath hitched. Then she pulled back, smile returning like a mask snapping into place. "We're just so happy you're out," she said, louder. "Nora's been praying for you." Grant's smile never wavered. "Let's get you home," he said. Home. The word made me want to laugh. Instead, I nodded. "Of course," I said. "Let's go home." Grant looked pleased. Elise looked relieved. Neither of them noticed my hand sliding into my pocket, fingers closing around the folded photograph. Neither of them noticed my eyes sweep the parking lot and land on a dull blue sedan idling 2 rows over. A man sat behind the wheel with a newspaper lifted too high. Ray. He didn't look at me. He didn't wave. He didn't need to. The presence of that car was the first domino already standing on its edge. I got into the SUV with Elise and Grant like a compliant old man. And as we pulled away, Elise turned toward me, voice soft for once, away from microphones. "You can have a room," she said quickly. "You can see Nora. We can make this work." I stared out the window at the road, familiar streets that looked wrong without my hands on the steering wheel. "You put me in a cage," I said. Her face tightened. "You don't understand." I turned to her slowly. "Then explain it," I said. "Explain how your father becomes a monster overnight." Her eyes darted to Grant, then back to me. For a second, her composure cracked. "I was scared," she whispered. "Of me?" She swallowed. "Of what would happen if I didn't." Grant's hand tightened slightly on the wheel. His voice stayed calm. "Let's not reopen old wounds. Today is about moving forward." I looked at him. "You talk about wounds like you didn't cause them." Grant glanced at me with polite warning. "Walter." I smiled, just a little, the kind of smile that does not offer comfort. "Grant," I said softly, "you should keep both hands on the wheel." He didn't understand why that mattered. Not yet. The house looked the same from the outside. White siding, front porch, the swing my wife loved. But when Elise opened the door, the inside hit me like chuzha zemlya, foreign ground. My wife's photographs were gone. The framed picture of Nora on my mantel had been replaced with a glossy campaign poster of Grant shaking hands with a smiling sheriff. My chest tightened. Elise stepped in behind me, talking too fast. We remodeled a bit, just freshened things up. Grant walked past me like he belonged there. We made the space more functional, he said. Functional. Like my life had been clutter. I turned slowly, taking it all in. The couch was new. The rug was new. The air smelled like lemon cleaner. And on the wall where my wife's quilt used to hang, there was a large modern painting that meant nothing. Elise hovered, hands twisting. Nora's at school. She'll be home at 3. She's excited to see you. I looked at Elise. Is she safe? Her eyes flicked away. Grant answered instead. Of course she's safe. Elise is a good mother. I stepped closer to Elise until she had to meet my gaze. Is she safe? I repeated. Or is she convenient? Elise's lips trembled. Grant's voice sharpened a fraction. Walter, watch your tone. I turned my head toward him slowly. You took 1.5 years from me, I said. Don't take your tone with it. The room went still. Elise forced a laugh that sounded like glass cracking. Dad, please, you're home. Let's make lunch. Not hungry, I said. I walked down the hall toward my old office. Grant followed. That room is being used. I built this house, I said without turning. I decide what it's used for. When I opened the office door, I saw a desk that was not mine. A laptop. Files stacked neatly. Grant's things. He stepped in behind me. Elise handles the household accounts now. It's simpler. I looked at the filing cabinet in the corner. I had kept important documents there for decades. Deeds, insurance, my wife's medical records, Nora's birth certificate. I walked to it and pulled the top drawer. Empty. A cold calm spread through my veins. I opened the second drawer. Empty. Third. Empty. I turned to Elise, who had appeared behind Grant in the doorway, face pale. Where is it? I asked quietly. She swallowed. We had to reorganize. Where? I repeated. Grant stepped between us, smile returning, soothing. Walter, you just got out. You're overwhelmed. Let's not... I moved closer until my face was inches from his. Where are my documents? I said. Grant's eyes hardened. We're handling things. I nodded slowly as if accepting it. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out the folded photograph and laid it on Grant's desk. The bruise on Nora's arm stared up at us like a confession. Elise's breath caught. Grant's smile faltered just for a heartbeat. Explain that, I said. Elise's hands flew to her mouth. Oh my God, that's not... Grant snapped. Where did you get that? I watched his reaction carefully. Not concern, not outrage. Fear. The kind of fear a man feels when evidence lands where he thought it couldn't. I kept my voice level. So she's not safe. Elise started shaking her head rapidly, tears spilling now, real this time. Dad, I didn't see that. I swear, I would never. Then look me in the eye, I said, and tell me who did. Her gaze flicked to Grant again. That was answer enough. Grant picked up the photo and flipped it over, searching for clues, for origin, for a leak. His control was slipping. Good. I reached past him, opened the closet behind the desk, and found what I expected. My old safe. The keypad had been replaced with a new one. Grant stepped forward, voice low. That's private. I looked at him. Private from me in my own home. He moved closer, and for the first time the veneer cracked. Walter, you don't know what you're doing. I smiled again slightly. Oh, I said. I know exactly. Because while he was busy changing locks and hiding files, he forgot something simple. I built that safe into the wall 20 years ago. The keypad was new, but the panel behind it was the same, and behind the panel was a manual release that only someone who installed it would know. I slid my fingers along the edge, found the seam, and pressed. A soft click. Grant lunged. Too late. The safe door swung open. Inside were not stacks of cash, not guns, not anything dramatic, just a single black hard drive, a small notebook, and a sealed envelope with Ray's handwriting on it. Grant froze. Elise made a sound like a sob. I pulled the envelope out and opened it. Inside was one sheet of paper, a list of dates, times, and transaction amounts, and at the bottom, one sentence. Federal interest confirmed. Do not tip him. My pulse stayed steady. I looked up at Grant. He stared at the paper, face tight. "You've been talking to Raymond," he said softly. I nodded. "He believes in me." Grant's eyes flicked toward Elise. Something silent passed between them. Then Elise said, voice thin, "Dad, please, you don't understand what Grant—" Grant cut her off, smile returning in a desperate attempt at control. "Walter, you're tired. Let's sit down." I slid the paper back into the envelope. "No," I said. "You're going to sit down." Grant's jaw tightened. "Excuse me?" I held his gaze and spoke quietly, carefully. "When I walked out of that gate," I said, "I got into your SUV. I smiled for your cameras. I came home peacefully. I did everything you wanted." Grant stared, confused. I continued. "And while you were busy celebrating how easy I was," I said, "Ray sent everything to the people you should have been afraid of from the beginning." The color drained from Elise's face. Grant's eyes sharpened. "You're bluffing," he whispered. I shook my head slowly. "I spent 18 months in a cage. Do you really think I'd come out bluffing?" Grant's hand twitched toward his phone. I watched it. "Go ahead," I said. "Call whoever you want." His fingers hovered. Then he stopped because a faint sound drifted from outside. A car door closing, then another. Footsteps on the porch, measured, heavy, not neighbors, not friends. Grant's face changed. Elise turned toward the front window, panic rising. The doorbell rang once, not polite, official. Grant swallowed. Elise whispered, "Dad? What did you do?" I walked past them, calm, toward the front door. "I came home," I said. I opened it. 3 men stood on my porch. 2 in plain clothes, 1 in a dark jacket with letters stitched over the chest that you only see when your life is about to split in half. Grant had built his whole identity on being the man who kept people safe. Now he stood behind me, frozen, because the people on my porch were not interested in his speeches. The man in front held up a badge. "Walter Rourke?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He nodded once. "Mr. Rourke, we'd like to talk, and we have a warrant." Behind me, Elise made a choking sound. Grant stepped forward, voice smooth, trying to regain control. "There must be some misunderstanding. I'm Grant Holloway." The agent didn't even look at him. He looked at me. "Sir," he said, "is he inside?" I met Elise's eyes over my shoulder. For the first time in 18 months, she looked at me like I was not a victim, like I was a force. "Yes," I said, "he's inside." Grant's hand shot out and grabbed Elise's wrist. Not gently, not lovingly. A grip, possession. Elise flinched, and in that flinch, I saw the truth that had been hiding under her performance. She didn't just betray me. She had been trapped too, but she had chosen to save herself by feeding him someone else. I stepped aside. The agents entered. Grant backed up, still speaking, still smiling, still trying to talk his way out of gravity. Elise stood in the hallway shaking, tears falling. And I stood by the open door, listening to the sound of Grant Holloway's life beginning to collapse in the exact way he had engineered mine. That was only the beginning, because the warrant was not about a gun in my driveway. It was about the money, and it was about Nora, and it was about the bruise on her arm. And when Nora walked through that front door 3 hours later and saw the house full of strangers with badges, and saw Grant's smile finally gone, replaced by something raw and animal, She ran straight to me like her body remembered what her mind had been forced to forget. She hit my chest hard, arms wrapping around my waist, and she buried her face in my shirt like she used to. "Grandpa," she sobbed. I held her so tight my arms ached. And over her head, I looked at Elise. My daughter stood in the doorway to the kitchen, watching, trembling, eyes red. "What did he do to her?" I asked, voice low. Elise's lips parted. She tried to speak. Nothing came out. Then she whispered, broken, He said you were dangerous. He said if I didn't keep her away from you, he would take her from me." I nodded slowly. Grant had used fear on her the same way he used fear on Nora, the same way he used fear on me. I looked down at my granddaughter and smoothed her hair. "Listen to me," I murmured into her ear. "You are safe now. You are with me." Nora clung harder, and behind us, in my living room, Grant Holloway finally raised his voice. Not for cameras, not for voters. For the first time, he sounded exactly like what he was, a man losing control. They took Grant that evening, not in front of a crowd, not in a dramatic parade. They took him quietly, with handcuffs that clicked like punctuation. He tried to look at Elise as they led him out, tried to pull her back into his gravity. Elise didn't move. She stood rigid, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the floor. When the door closed behind him, she made a sound I will never forget. Not relief, not grief, a hollow sound, like something finally snapped inside her. Ray came into the house an hour later, hat in his hands, eyes tired. He looked older than when I'd last seen him, because doing the right thing in a crooked world always ages you. He nodded at me. "You did good staying calm." "I wasn't calm," I said. "I was focused." Ray's gaze shifted to Nora, who was sitting on the couch with a blanket around her shoulders, clutching a stuffed rabbit that had once belonged to my wife. "She okay?" he asked softly. "No," I said, "but she will be." Elise sat at the kitchen table like a woman waiting for sentencing. Ray looked at her with something like pity and something like contempt. "She signed papers," Ray said quietly to me. "Power of attorney, asset transfers. Some of it might be reversible. Some of it depends on whether she cooperates." Elise's voice came out small. "Cooperate with what?" Ray set a folder on the table in front of her. "Cooperate with the truth," he said. Elise's fingers hovered over the folder like it was hot. Then she looked up at me, eyes swollen. "Dad," she whispered, "I didn't think it would go this far." I stared at her. I thought of the courthouse, the cuffs, Nora's terrified nod. "How far did you think it would go?" I asked. "When you sent your father to prison?" Elise flinched as if I'd struck her. I thought you'd get probation," she said shakily. Grant said the judge would go easy because of your age. He said it would scare you into signing things and then it would be over." My voice stayed even. "You were willing to ruin my name to make me sign." Tears slid down her cheeks. I was scared. I leaned forward, elbows on the table, and lowered my voice until it was almost gentle. "Here is what fear costs," I said. "It costs other people their lives." Elise's mouth opened, trembling. "What do I do?" Ray answered before I could. "You tell them everything." Elise looked at Nora on the couch, then back at me. Her voice broke. Will you let me see her?" I looked over at my granddaughter. Nora stared at Elise like she was staring at a stranger wearing her mother's face. I felt something in my chest tighten. "I'm not going to punish Nora to punish you," I said quietly. "But you're going to earn her trust back. You're going to earn mine back. And you're going to do it without performances." Elise nodded, crying silently now. Ray slid the folder closer. "Start talking," he said. Elise's hands shook as she opened it. Inside were printouts of transactions, shell companies, forged signatures, and a trail that led straight from my business accounts to Grant's campaign, to properties in other names, to a private academy that wasn't a school at all. It was a holding place, a place to keep a child quiet while adults moved money and lives around like pieces on a board. Elise stared at the papers and whispered, horrified, "I didn't know about this." Ray's voice was flat. "You didn't want to know." Elise pressed both hands to her face and started sobbing. And I sat back, exhausted, not from prison, not from revenge, but from the simple, brutal fact that my daughter had been standing at the edge of truth for a long time and chose comfort instead. Nora shifted on the couch, blanket slipping. She looked at me with eyes too old for her age. "Grandpa," she whispered, "am I going to have to go away?" I stood up immediately and crossed the room to her. I knelt in front of her so she could see my face. "No," I said. "You are not going anywhere you don't want to go." She swallowed. "Promise?" I placed my hand over my heart. "I promise," I said. "And I do not break promises." She stared at me for a long second, then leaned forward and rested her forehead against mine. A small gesture, a desperate one, and it nearly broke me. I held her gently and looked over her shoulder at Elise. My daughter watched us, shaking, realization finally carving into her. She had wanted a clean story for the cameras, a redeemed father, a healed family. Now she was getting the only story that matters, the true one. And the day of my release had become her undoing. Not because I hurt her, because I stopped protecting her from the consequences she earned. Because the world she built on lies finally met a truth that had teeth. 2 months later, the judge looked very different when he spoke my name. The courtroom was fuller this time, not with reporters hungry for a scandalous old man waving a gun, with federal agents, state investigators, and quiet people in suits who did not smile. The charges against me were vacated. The word sounded too small for what it meant. Vacated does not give you back 18 months. It does not give you back the birthdays you missed, the nights Nora cried without me, the way my wife's grave sat alone without my footsteps visiting it. But it opened the door to something prison had nearly killed in me: dignity. Elise sat behind her attorney, face pale, eyes down. She had agreed to cooperate fully. She had signed statements. She had testified about what Grant demanded, what he threatened, what he orchestrated. Grant sat at the defense table, no longer polished, no longer smiling. When he looked at me, there was no warmth, no charm, only hatred. And underneath it, disbelief. Because men like him do not believe consequences apply to them. The judge asked if I wished to speak. I stood slowly, feeling every year in my knees. I looked at Grant. Then I looked at Elise. Then I looked at the empty seat beside Elise, where Nora should have been, because I refused to let her see this. This was not for her. This was for the adults who broke the world she lived in. My daughter chose a man, I said, voice steady, who promised her a life she didn't earn, and to get it, she handed him mine. Elise made a small sound, like a wounded animal. I continued anyway, because truth does not soften itself to spare feelings. I am not here to beg for pity, I said. I am here to say this: if you teach people that tears erase crimes, you will drown your community in them. Grant's jaw tightened. I lost my freedom, I said. My granddaughter lost her grandfather, and my daughter lost whatever was left of her conscience. Elise sobbed quietly. I did not look away. Grant Holloway built his name on safety, I said, but he only knows control. He used the law like a club. He used my family like cover. And he thought an old man would come out of prison too ashamed to speak. I looked directly at Grant. I am not ashamed, I said. I am angry, and I am still standing. The courtroom was silent. The judge's gavel sounded like a door shutting. Grant was denied bond, his trial date set. Elise was remanded to a structured program and faced sentencing contingent on her cooperation. And me? I walked out of that courthouse a free man, not because the world suddenly became fair, but because I refused to stay buried. Outside, Ray stood by the steps, hands in his pockets, eyes tired. He nodded once. "You got her out," he said. I looked past him to my truck, back in my name again. Nora sat in the passenger seat, small and quiet, clutching her stuffed rabbit. When she saw me, her face brightened in a way that still made my chest ache. I walked to her, opened the door, and she launched herself into my arms like she was afraid the ground would swallow me again. "Grandpa," she whispered fiercely, "are we going home?" I held her, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, the warmth of her, the reality of her. "Yes," I said, and my voice cracked despite my best effort. "We're going home." Nora pulled back and studied my face carefully, like a child who has learned to search for lies. Then she nodded, satisfied. I buckled her in myself, hands steady. When I climbed into the driver's seat and gripped the wheel, it felt like reclaiming a limb. Ray leaned in through the window and said quietly, "You did what you had to." I looked at the courthouse behind him, then at the road ahead. "No," I said. "I did what she forced me to." Then I started the engine. And as I drove away with my granddaughter beside me, the world outside looked the same. But I knew better now. The day of my release was never about my freedom. It was about theirs. The freedom Elise and Grant stole from me. The freedom they stole from Nora. They thought prison would make me quiet. Instead, it made me patient. And patience, when it finally moves, is unstoppable.
My grandpa's words really happened. I believe him. If you want more true tales like this, hit subscribe.